Welcome, Brian, to the Honor Cafe Hall of Heroes.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
You know, we've been trying to plan this interview for weeks now, haven't we? It's been a while.
It seems like years, but yes.
And General Hummer actually told me that we needed an interview. And it's really crazy because I don't know how many times I've come into breakfast and we're just sitting there and we're just talking, and I never realized your history and the history of your family, and I never knew. And then General Hummer said, you know, you got to interview Brian. And I said, well, why? And he told me, he said, what's your position now? What's the position that you hold is the Marine Corps command or commandant?
I'm actually the commandant of the local Marine Corps detachment in Conroe.
Wow, that's amazing. And so he told me about that, and I said, well, that's great. And he said, but that's not the end of the story. You got to hear about his dad. And so when we were playing this interview, I'm like, well, you know, your dad's no longer with us, but we got to capture his story. And what a better way to capture his story through his son, who has his own story, and who is here and is dressed blues because I asked him to show up in dress blues. So looking sharp, best uniforms. To my chagrin as an Army officer, best uniforms on the planet, the Marine Corps uniform.
Wow,
and
thank you.
And you're here. So first of all, let's talk about your incredible career. And where were you born?
I was actually born in Jacksonville, North Carolina, by a Marine Corps base.
Marine Corps base, okay. And is that where you grew up, or were you like a military brat?
I was a military brat.
So you were moving all over the place, and your dad
Yes.
was in the Marine Corps.
Yes.
So where did you end up going to high school?
I ended up going to high school in Shreveport, Louisiana, because that's where my dad retired.
Okay. And so that explains how your close proximity then to Texas.
Yes.
And how did you end up in Texas?
Well, that's kind of a long story, but I went where the Marines sent me when I retired. I went where the job sent me.
Okay.
And the job sent me to Ohio. And then links to people in Oklahoma, it sent me to Oklahoma. And then when I retired, I'd always wanted to get back down to Texas area, so I bought a house in Texas and moved.
Awesome. So now let's get to your entry into service, and of course you had to choose the Marine Corps, right? I mean, there was no other option.
I did, and actually I was offered a higher rank going into the Army.
But you chose the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I was in Army ROTC in high school, so I was in it for 4 years. And because I was in it for 4 years, I had a good grade. When I went to the Army recruiter, he's like, well, we'll give you Spec 4 to join the Army. And then I went to the Marine Corps, and I went in as an E3, guaranteed electronics. I figured any service giving me E4 wasn't worth anything.
That's great.
But that was literally my thought process.
Yeah. So you entered the Marine Corps, and where did you do your basic?
I went to my basic to San Diego, and of course, part of the time you go to Camp Pendleton and Santa Ana Fray. So. And
what was your job then after that?
I went to electronics school for about a year and became a radio repairman.
And so where did your career take you?
I was kind of unique because I was never at the same unit twice except for 29 Palms schools. I ended up going from boot camp to Camp Lejeune, or actually I stayed at 29 Palms after school. Then I went to overseas for a year to Iwakuni, Japan, and then I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was stationed at Geiger for about 3 years. Then I went to school again because I made staff sergeant in 4 years and 4 months. So they sent me to a school. So I became a electronic radio tech. So then I went to San Diego, not as a drill instructor, but as depot communications. I ran the maintenance for the recruit depot for 2 years. Wow.
So that's an amazing career, and you made up for it with rank. You didn't miss anything in the Army, because I'm looking at those stripes on your arms, and that's serious business. And if people that mainly people that watch this show or watch this YouTube channel, they get it. But that's a big accomplishment. I mean, getting to where you're at, in the Marine Corps. And what was your best memory about the Marine Corps?
Oh, really, it's a camaraderie. I mean, if anyone goes in the Marine Corps, they understand that it's tradition, 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 and each other, you take care of each other. So my best memory was camaraderie, and my last command, I was a senior enlisted on an Army base.
Wow.
I was a master sergeant in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and it was kind of neat because we had a detachment there, and they really looked up to you as a master sergeant, and you had an opportunity to groom people, and it was fun.
You know, I've talked to one other person that was at Fort Huachuca, and he didn't like kind of spill the beans on what goes on there, but you know, that's a serious listening post, and a lot of people don't even know that place exists. So what does go on in Fort Huachuca that you can talk about?
They train, the Marines go there to train in intel groups. There's linguists and all levels of intelligence groups gets training there. So that's the big part. And it's not just the Marines, it's the Army. A lot of people go there for training.
Yeah.
Also interoperability testing center. I was the maintenance chief for the testing center. So I actually ran the maintenance shop for all the equipment you test to make sure they're interoperable across all services. So we did that there as well.
And that's interesting because, you know, branches are separated. I mean, there's a lot of pride in working alone, but there are certain fields where everything has to work together. And
Absolutely.
Where all branches are together, and I know on the medical side they're really trying to do that with the TRICARE and everything that they do. But so for communications, it had to all work together. All services had to be kind of on the same channel.
Yes,
as a pun, I guess, you know, but they had to. So I mean, did you get pushback sometimes from other services about the way of doing businesses, or?
Oh, always, because the Marine Corps wants to do it their way, the Army wants to do it their way. I mean, a little history, Grenada, that was a problem. The Army couldn't talk to the Marines couldn't talk to the Army. No one could talk to each other, so there were independent units working on their own. So it's a big pushback because the Marines want their type of equipment, the Army wants their type of equipment, and even though they share some of it doesn't work with each other, especially the air to air and ground to air. You know, pilots can't talk to other pilots, or at least they couldn't. They probably can now. But.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a big evolution in
yes.
the military.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people don't realize the significance of Grenada, because, you know, what happened in Grenada was a wake-up call.
Absolutely.
Meaning, you know, I was part of Grenada, and I know that they did an airborne drop with the Army that was disastrous. They were too low. They thought they were coming out 1,000. They were at 500 feet. It was a disaster. The Marine Corps, they couldn't communicate with what's going on, had them march across and help out with that fiasco, you know, with all the injuries. And then the assault on the school, and everything was going on with calling and airstrikes, with the intel that was going on with the ground, and they, you know, with the jungle and the environment. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
But it was a good disaster because we didn't lose many lives, but I think we learned a lot moving forward, which made us much stronger going into the first, you know, Gulf War, you know, and that's interesting. So you have this amazing career in the military, and you know your dad who, I just can't wait to dive into this story, and that's why I want to transition to start talking about your dad. And so, what was your father's name?
His name was Wade Emerson Hampton.
And he fought in 3 wars.
Yes.
So he was in World War II.
Correct.
Korea.
Correct.
And then he went to Vietnam.
Yes.
My brain can't process that. I mean, it's amazing. And what happened, the kind of backstory is General Hummer said, you've got to interview Brian about his father. And then so you really didn't know really the depth of everything until your mother passed away.
Yes, until I got a lot of the papers and could actually go through the papers.
And what was it like, you know, starting to open this stuff up? What was going through your mind? Because you knew your dad. He raised you. You're around him all his life. He didn't start talking about the war till you said later on in life, and then you start uncovering all these documents. What was going through your head at that point?
Well, I guess one thing I found immediately was that I knew bits and pieces, and going through all the documents, it started going, oh, okay, now I see. Oh, I didn't even know he had yellow fever. I didn't know he had, I think it was cholera. I didn't know he had either of those. I knew he had been in 3 wars, but to the extent of some of it, looking through his records, I could see more of what he went through. And I guess that was the amazing part of it.
Where was he raised? Where did he and what was that time frame of like pre-World War II? How?
Well, his dad, his grandfather, and his father both worked for the railroad.
Okay.
His grandfather was actually called the Red Rose conductor because he always wore a red rose every day, and he was well known in the railroad even when he passed away. So, my dad's father was a real jerk and died when he was like 43. Had stomach cancer, just really mean. And my father was close to his grandfather.
And you said his father actually was the part of the Bonnie and Clyde. He used to supply them with food and everything.
Oh, they would hide out on the farms, and my dad and his brother would take fried chicken and food out to Bonnie and Clyde. And we asked him about that, and he says, wasn't that dangerous? He says, well, they paid well.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And so he's raised in that environment, which gives you a lot of grit to begin with. And then he, how did he enter World War II? Was he drafted?
I'm pretty sure he was drafted. I mean, you have to understand, my dad had a formal 8th grade education because he had to work on the farm. He had to work with my parents. So he learned skills like mechanics and stuff like that. I only found out when he got into the Army Air Corps that he was a technician after he died. I didn't know that. I thought he was always a mechanic.
So he enters service and he goes into the Air Corps and tell us about that.
Well, he joins the Army Air Corps as a technician. Well, I believe he got drafted in the Army Air Corps as a technician, and this was around 1942. And during that period, money's tight, so he wanted to get more pay. So he changed to be a radio operated machine gunner, which was a tail gunner for a B-17 bomber. And he did that, and he flew out of England, and of course, later on, his plane was shot down.
How many missions do you have? And that's what I want to start showing is this is amazing, the documentation that you found. If you want to hold that up to the camera for a second. So what are we looking at here?
Well, this is the flight record, all the flights he was on, and any of them that were combat, they wrote combat next to him.
Okay. And
this one covered it up until he became prisoner of war. So it doesn't have his last flight on it. So on here it showed he had about 19 hours of combat, but he had hundreds of hours of flight time is what this shows.
That's amazing. So he has these combat missions, and then he gets shot down.
Yes.
And he survives. Obviously, he survives.
He almost died. He had broken legs, and another member of his crew pulled him out. So
he went down with it. He didn't parachute. Did he parachute out?
No, he crash landed. They crash landed the plane.
Wow.
And he was in the hospital for a couple weeks or a couple months after he was a prisoner of war. He was in the hospital.
So they captured him. Obviously, it was the Germans, probably not the Nazis that captured him.
Yes, because he was in Stalin prison camp. So
okay, and so he goes to a prisoner of war camp, and So when did his parents know? How did that notification happen with his parents?
They got messages. In fact, I had a. Well, I don't have it here, but
I'll show them. We're going to put them up in the interview.
Anyway, they got a telegram that says. From a telegram, they got letters from the newspaper, got letters from congressmen and governor, and said, sorry, we heard your son has been missing in action. And then later, they're going to notice, we've been informed that your son is now a prisoner of war.
Wow. So initially they just get a notice that he's missing in action. And although they are getting these notographs and telegrams, it's so much different back then than it was because there were so many casualties, and they didn't get the visit from the door and the chaplain, that kind of support. It was just a telegram.
Right.
They're missing in action. Your son has been killed. and which seems unthinkable, to receive that. And so they got news, and then that's got to be horrifying, and you don't know what's going on. And then when did they find out he was a prisoner of war?
It was about a month later. It was a month to 2 months later they found out he was a prisoner of war, and I think the one way they found out it was through the Red Cross when they visit the prison war camps, and that's how they found out about it.
And we're going to display, and we'll give the link to them where people can look at it actually online, is the Red Cross letters, actually publications that, and I've got them over here. We've got stacks and stacks of documents, and I'll say this at the end of the interview, but I want to say it right now. We're going to work out a time because this documentation and these letters are so amazing that we're going to have a time when we're going to display this up here at the Honor Cafe, and people can come look at it and have lunch and really take in this amazing history that is your father. So he's in a prisoner of war camp. When did they started getting letters from him then?
They did. They got some letters from him, and here's an example of one letter that it shows it's from prisoner of war.
Yeah.
And on the back you can see it looks like they blacked something out. So
yeah, they did. So the Germans were editing these, and then the U.S. was editing them. So they would be edited by two forces when they got handed off, and you just didn't mail them. I guess they got transferred through the Red Cross, and then they would look at them and make sure no information or intel could be gathered. Or it's pretty amazing.
Well, this is one of the last ones, and so it didn't get to him. It came back.
Really?
Yeah, it was sent back. So this is one of them then that was mailed, but came back. This was from my grandmother to him.
Wow.
But it came back. And I do have others that he did receive.
Handwritten. I've seen them in the postcards, and we're going to show those, and I'll show them on the video. And it's just amazing. We're going to take a cut right here. Just wait 2 minutes left. All right, you want to stop and then restart?
Still, sorry about dropping my glasses.
No, that's okay. 1, 2, 3, start again. So he got home, and that must have been an incredible fanfare. And it's just, so that was never talked to your grandparents or anybody ever talk about him coming home from World War II?
No, they did talk about him escaping twice.
So he escaped
twice. And the third time they were going to escape, they actually did dig a tunnel out through the toilet. And my dad, the way he told it was so funny. He said that it had rained really hard, and the guard was walking back there, and he fell in their hole. And he says that guard shouldn't even been there. And so then they made him fill the hole back in.
Yeah.
But that was the last time he escaped was about a month before he was liberated. They got him back, and then he was liberated about a month later.
Did he ever talk about how, what it was like to try to escape and being recaptured and being put, he got put in, confinement and
he never talked about it.
I'm surprised he didn't get killed. I mean, that being escaped and then, sent back.
Yeah. He talked about that he escaped with a Frenchman once, and I'm not sure the details, but they were hungry, and there was a horse, and a dead horse, and they cut a piece of horse off, and they ate horse meat. But there were some stories that happened, and he started crying, so I don't know. He didn't talk a lot about it because he had lost some people there. So it was hard. I heard more about this 60 days before he died than I heard my whole life.
Wow. Tell some stories like before he passed. What did he talk about?
Well, he got a little bit looser. Before he went to Vietnam, we used to go ask him for money when he was sleeping, and he'd just and give us some money.
Yeah.
After Vietnam, if you go up to him, he would be startled, and he'd wake up immediately.
Wow.
Because he was so sensitive to noises. But one day we were working, and we were doing pulpwood because that's what he did, because he couldn't get a job when he got out. And I did something, I don't know what I did. And I said, well, I was thinking, and he yells at me going, I don't pay you to think. I looked at him and I said, Dad, you don't pay me. And then he's like, he realized what he said, and he said, well, do I need to pay you? And I'm like, no, you're fine.
That's funny.
I got to know my dad closer and enjoy being with him the last 4 years of me being at home than I ever did, because he was always away. He worked early in the morning, he worked when he got off. My sisters told me that he used to work another job and then he'd come back because he wanted to take care of his family. So he was always busy doing something.
I think that's that generation, you know, taking care of your family is number one. And you know, you're being, you know, compassionate or you know, loving, you know, the way that generation showed love was providing.
Yep.
And that's hard, because, you know, as the generations change, they don't recognize that that's just the way they were wired.
Right.
And I understand that. I get that, and you know, people our age, they do. But so let's talk about the next phase of your dad's service. So he goes to Korea. After all that, being a prisoner of war, he ends up in Korea.
Well, before that, he gets out of the Army Air Corps. He's done with the military, prisoner of war, all that. And his brother talks to me. He says, "Look, there's no war. Join the Marine Corps Reserves. Just join the reserves. Get a little extra cash. No big deal." So a couple years later, about 4 years later, he joins the Marine Corps Reserve. Well, they activated the reserve during Korea.
Yeah.
So he got activated shortly after he joined the reserves, and he went to Korea.
That's amazing, and if, you know, most people, like I said, that are watching this, they understand the military, but Korea is the forgotten war. Korea was probably one of the most horrific experiences ever, because we thought we were going to march in there, take it over, and then the Chinese jumped in. It was cold like you can't imagine.
Right.
It was miserable, and not only did he go to Korea, but let's talk about all the places he was in Korea. I mean, this is incredible what he did over in Korea.
Well, excuse my pronunciation, but I'm looking at a document from him. It was his discharge.
Yeah.
It was his honorable discharge, and that's when he got out in December of '51 after his active duty, and it shows that he was in participated in the capture and securing of Seoul, Korea, Wonsong, Hangnam, Chosun campaign. He was involved in it.
That was a brutal campaign.
Yes.
That was a horrible campaign.
He was in Northern Korea, action against enemy forces in South and Central Korea, and he was at places like Pohang, Pusan, and Monsan. I can't pronounce it, I'm sorry, and Wonsan. So the horror of being a prisoner of war, and then it's hard to convey to anybody that doesn't know how bad it was. It was brutal. It didn't matter where you were. Like in World War II, there was clear lines of fighting. Right. Korea was where it started to change, because hospitals were getting overrun, right. And when they overran those hospitals, they killed everybody. And when they overran other forces, supporting forces, so it didn't matter where you were in Korea, you were getting shot at, you were fighting, and the fighting was brutal. And so he not only goes to Korea, but he's all over to Korea, and he's in the Marines, and then he survives that. That's the other thing, is you survive Korea. Well,
and then,
may I interrupt you a second? When he was in Korea, his brother is a Navy corpsman. He would go out at night and help bring wounded back in with his brother.
That's right. You talked about that.
So I think that's kind of important to bring that out. And we were just, and I know this is true because his two brothers who were in the Navy were there when I was there with my dad before he passed away, and they're telling all these stories, and it was like, really? So some of the stuff I didn't even know.
So not only are you doing your job, but you're going that extra mile, and you're going out and you're retrieving casualties.
Right.
With your brother.
With his brother, who was in Korea at the same time he was there.
So to get a picture of that, you grew up in a harsh environment, and you're with your brother. Then you're with your brother in war, right. And then you're with your brother risking your lives with the thought of mama's at home, and you're going out and get wounded. And you know, at that time, it wasn't like you wear a red cross and they wouldn't shoot at you. No. At that time, if you had a red cross on or a white cross and you're going out to get wounded, you're getting shot at.
Right.
And that is incredible. I mean, this is the stuff that movies need to be made of. I mean, these are the stories that is hard. You have to kind of stop for a second and think about. And so do you remember any of these things his brother and then we're talking about? I mean, specifically, or?
I do know, like, his brother, not Korea, but World War II, his brother was talking about that after Pearl Harbor was bombed, I don't know what ship he was on, but they were out at sea and they got hit, but they didn't sink. And he said the front of the ship was gone, but they made it into Pearl Harbor. They don't know how they did it, but they did. So, I mean, a lot of those stories in like Korea, you know, the pieces I have are what my dad's told me or what I've seen in documents. So I'm disappointed I didn't record it or something.
You know, we're doing that now. That's why we're doing this now.
Right.
And we're going to link this video, and what we're going to do is we're going to write this story out, because we just don't have the time in this video to cover it all. So for those that are listening to this, we're going to write the story out, and we're going to compile the story so it's better. And then you're going to be able to see these documents. When I held the letters from handwritten from him in the prisoner of war camp, and then when I held that document that you just read from, showing that I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. I was overwhelmed with the thought that men like this, you know, walked the earth and they protected our freedom. This generation, it's amazing. But that's not the end of the story.
Oh no.
So let's go on.
Well, after Korea, after 51, he again said, I've had enough, and got out. And he went and started working his mechanic shop again. And my dad was a lot of things, but he was a poor businessman. He would do work for people and they owed him and they'd never pay him. And finally, he got sick. They basically ripped him off. And so when it got better, he says, you know what, I'm going back in. So he goes back into reserves in 54 and then becomes active in the Marines in 55. And then stayed in it until he retired. Of course, another war came.
Yeah. And what war was that?
That would be the Vietnam War.
Oh my goodness.
And he went over to there and he was sent to Quezon. So he was a Quezon during the attacks on Quezon, and he was actually the maintenance chief. And he would come home. When he came home, he told me a few stories. And my dad, you know, didn't tell the story like it was horrified. It was like, well, I was walking with these two Marines, and one of them had his field jacket open, went around when a mortar came in, and the idiot didn't have his jacket closed, and a piece went right in and killed him instantly. So if the idiot, if he'd have been wearing his uniform like he's supposed to, he wouldn't have died.
Wow.
That's my dad.
Yeah.
So the news people wanted to talk to him, and they didn't like what he said because he was kind of blunt. So they ended up just taking a picture of him. So he made the leather neck, or it was a leather neck, and it just said, Gunny Hampton mailed a letter.
Yeah, your dad, when I see his picture, I think this guy should have been cast for movies, because he personifies his picture like the toughest guy that you know, basically when I look at his picture, I think if I went sideways with this guy, he would kick my ass, and I'm a big guy. I mean, he's just grit. This is this is the third war. He's over in Vietnam. And I can't imagine that you're in Vietnam and you're a younger person, you're serving with somebody that served in World War II. I mean, it doesn't register. But he's in his third war.
Yeah.
And what else did he do? Do you know any?
Oh, he was a bare-fisted boxer when he was younger. He drove moonshine during Prohibition, car with moonshine.
Wow. And he's in Vietnam.
So then later on he's in Vietnam. So
he survives it.
Yeah.
Again, he survives his third war.
Yep. And he was supposed to go. They said, "Well, are you going to go back?" He says, "No, I'm not." It was volunteer then, so he got out.
Yeah.
He says, "I'm retiring." So he retired in 1970.
1970, he retires. He was in. So he goes in the 40s, retires in the 70s, and what else? Did you ever ask him about? You know, Dad, you served in 3 wars. How? You know, he didn't talk about it, but towards the end, what was that like? I mean, talking to him.
I mean, he didn't really talk. Like, I think I gave you some pictures where his job was to photograph accidents and people getting killed and stuff in Korea. So I gave you a number of pictures of that.
Yeah.
I mean, he did that. He didn't. I think he got kind of jaded while he was over there. It's like you get numb.
Yeah.
And you just understand you're going to lose people. So he didn't make friends.
Yeah.
He had tried for warrant officer one time, and he told this story, and he felt that another guy that was kind of didn't like him told someone something, so kind of kept his package from getting a high rating, so he didn't make warrant officer.
Yeah.
Oh, I found a document when he was in the Army Air Corps. After he got out of the prisoner of war camp, it was like in July, he got out in April, and it said, these are the awards you're allowed to wear. And one of them's a Silver Star, and a couple of them are Air Medals, and he never received them. So I actually turned in paperwork to see if I can get him his records corrected, if they'll do that and give him credit for that.
Yeah, and you know, I think they will, and if we got to push more, we will, and that's part of the thing is when we display this up here at the Honor Cafe, we can do a ceremony, and you'll receive for him those medals, and I think it'll be a great way to honor him, and so he survives. He comes back from Vietnam, and here's what's interesting, and is the fact that he wasn't jumpy till he got back from Vietnam. I mean, you said you wake you up, and he wasn't, but he got back, and
it was different. He was different.
And we talk a lot about guys coming back from Vietnam who really had post-traumatic stress, and you would think of anything, getting shot down and being at Korea, you would have that. But I wonder what was different about the experience of Vietnam that he came back. Do you think it was maybe the way they came home, the way, you know, how bad it was, and what was going on? What in your mind?
I'm thinking it's the time. He came back from Korea in '51. He went over in Vietnam in 68 or 67, 68.
Yeah.
I think it's when, or the day, so I think it was the time, and he was older. And you know, when you're young, you don't think of mortality.
Yeah.
I mean, I joined the Marine Corps knowing it was Vietnam going on, thinking I would go to Vietnam, and it didn't bother me because I was young. He was 48, 49. He got out of the Marine Corps, he was 48.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's just time. It really is a factor.
Yeah. Yeah, but whatever, it's just remarkable that he served in all three of these wars, and then he survived. And I mean, you're a living legacy now. And as this story unfolds, as we start to go through, you know, peel through more of this documentation, you know, I'm thinking that we might do another, like, you know, add to the interview as far as when we find this.
Right.
And I'm really excited about, you know, this in the display that we'll do, because to be able to read these letters and then see these service records and then the pictures of all that happened in his life, I mean, it's really going to be neat. And I'm telling you, this is the stuff that movies, you know, are made of. This needs to be a movie someday. His life and what he did, and I am just so excited to partner with you to unfold his life, and as you know, start to really discover who your dad was, and you live your whole life with him. He was your father, and yet you're just now starting to discover just how amazing he was. I mean, it's remarkable. Yeah. If you could say anything to your dad right now, what would you say?
Well, one, I'd say I miss him because he passed away really young. He was 72.
Yeah.
But I would say I was proud of him.
Yeah.
And the more I read about him, the more I see that, you know, he was a true hero. When people say people are heroes, he was a true hero. He was my hero.
Yeah. No, he was a hero. I mean, he is a hero's hero and a man's man, and this is just awesome. And this is probably one of the best discoveries that I think we'll ever have, you know, on this YouTube channel. Is your father's story.
I'm glad I can be part of it.
I'm so grateful that you're here at the Honor Cafe and you're locally. I don't have to, you know, we can do this together as this unfolds.